It's been a wonderful conference so far, just amazing speakers and presentations that instill such hope and profound wonder, even anticipation of what is to come. And I want to share that as a chaplain, as an interfaith chaplain working embedded with the medical team with people on the edge of immortality, this kind of hope is transformative for them. Even as they're swallowed by grief, they feel that fundamentally, when we are deeply loved, we feel held and we feel safe. And then when we love deeply, we feel courage and we feel clarity. And my job as a chaplain is not to get religion into anyone. In fact, part of my job is to protect them from that. But instead to support that inner wisdom that we're all wired with. We know how to come into this world and we know how to exit. To help patients, especially near the end of life, to realize that death is a requirement for our transformation. Death, as they say, is a comma, not a period. It is one of the most profound privileges to swim in suffering 8 hours a day with others, and yet to incarnate the hope and the compassion that enables the patient and the healthcare staff to feel safe and connected. So the title of the talk is On the Edge of Immortality, the Power of NDEs in Preparing Patients for the Final Journey, but I like the title of the talk that was sent out with the IANS advertisement. Anyone notice it? Yes. On the Edge of Immorality. Now that's a lot more fun. So which talk would you like? You want that one? Well, confession will follow after the presentation, so we'll talk. I am an ordained Lutheran minister. I had a church for 10 years, and during that tenure in the parish, I noticed that nobody talked about near-death experiences. It was never raised in seminary as part of our training. We were taught theology, church administration. We were taught how to do a church service and the liturgy, but there was no deep awareness or education about what is prayer, what is the nature of consciousness, how exactly do we continue in life after our body dies. That central hope of the faith was never expounded upon except as the promise. And this is one of the weaknesses, this is one of the failings I find of organized religion, and I'm speaking specifically from Christianity since I'm a Christian minister in a traditional mainline faith. The emphasis has always been on the petitioning to an external God instead of our participation in the consciousness of God, which is ironic because the central teachings of Christ is that you are one with God as he is one. In fact, there was a prayer he had near the end of his life in the Garden of Gethsemane, and that's what he says. May they be one with us as I am one with you. And he said, you will do greater things than I do, right? You are no less than me. You are. So to see Jesus through this tradition as the external Savior who rescues you, instead as the Christ consciousness in which we dwell. And this is manifested or expressed in many different religious traditions. The core of them is always the same, that God or the divine is love. Love is not what God does, it's what the divine is. So in the end, love is the only true religion. In the end, as we love, we are focusing upon the most noble and beautiful thing we could do. And at the end of our life, the eternal homework always waiting for us is to work on the unfinished love story. That's what it's all about. Let me show you, introduce you to my great teacher in that universal project. This is pheochromocytoma. Now, pheos are a localized tumor that makes a Molotov cocktail of chemicals. They're called catecholamines, which includes norepinephrine, right? And some massive amount of dopamine and things that are fine in very small doses, but pheochromas are this time bomb, and the trigger to make them explode is your adrenal gland. So as soon as you have any fight or flight response, as soon as you feel any intense emotion at all, anger, even anxiety, as well as passion and incredible joy, it causes the adrenaline to trigger the tumor, and it blows. Most people die from pheochromocytoma the first time it explodes, and it takes about 10 seconds. So with this type of cancer, it doesn't spread out and consume your body. It sits there as a time bomb. Small explosions result in what appear to be anxiety attacks. So you start to sweat. Your heart is racing. You get a tremor. No, this is not pheochromocytoma. This is called an essential tremor, and it's just an annoying condition. You get cramps in your stomach. Your fingernails turn blue because your capillaries are constricting, and then they're also being flooded with excess calcium. If you can pull yourself up out of that nosedive, you will live to see another day. I am, as far as we know, the only recorded case of recurrent metastatic pheochromocytoma. I'm the lucky one who survived it. It appeared first when I was 17. It was in my bladder, so the metabolites were flushed out with my urine, and I didn't have the anxiety and the response to the chemicals. But the second one, 10 years later, was growing on my femoral artery, seeding cells to the rest of my body, and when it blew, the effects were felt instantaneously. It taught me how to focus on the present moment, how to use meditation to override the autonomic nervous system and ground myself when I was spiraling into oblivion. It taught me to listen to my body compassionately, but it did not teach me how to smarten up. I continually got into situations that would trigger the adrenaline and make the tumor explode. Specifically, getting up and doing some public speaking. Because I was a minister. I would be doing services 52 weeks a year. If I get a holiday, then a bit less. And it was on internship that one of those explosions sent me over the edge to a realm that changed me forever. When these things grow on the adrenal gland, as 90% of them do, we call them pheochromocytoma. When they grow elsewhere in the body, they're called paranganglioma. It's just a different word for the same thing. 10% of them grow off the adrenal. 10% of those are malignant. I fall into all those categories. And it just kept growing back. So if there is a lesson to be learned from getting cancer, I have no idea what it is. I must be the most thick-headed student on the planet because it just kept coming back. When you're lying in the hospital bed, you tend to contemplate death. If you have cancer, even with a very treatable cancer, that's on the back of your mind. You usually spend a lot of energy protecting your loved ones and family from the conversation. You don't want to look like you're giving up hope. You don't want to bring their energy down. Patients put a lot of effort into being strong for their loved ones. And the loved ones are thinking about death as well. It's that word, cancer, but they dare not speak of it with the patient for fear it will look like they're giving up, that they don't believe in the patient's resiliency. And so everyone puts on the necessary mask of courage and strength, but end up on different pages, not able to be completely vulnerable when the heart is longing to be so transparent and held by others whom they love. This is my hospital bed. I use photography to try and communicate the experience of the patient, and I've used a technique here that makes you feel how very small and vulnerable and fragile you are in the bed. Of course, I was never small in the bed. They didn't have a bed that would fit me. We had to take the footboard off, and my feet would dangle out, and if I elevated up the back, I'd slide down, and eventually they actually found a 7-foot bed for me, which is great. I'm 6'8". I'm the high priest, right? When I go see patients, I try to sit down as soon as possible. I don't want to loom over them looking like the Grim Reaper. Because you know that's what they think when a chaplain walks in the room. Oh my goodness, it must be really bad. They sent the God guy. Is he going to check my ticket and see which way I'm going? Not at all. Professional chaplains, spiritual care providers, are there to help you connect with the unfinished love story, with the deep, abiding, helping you work with the ambiguity in such a way that you find yourself again, that you focus on your love, that you do that homework that's waiting to be done, the words that we didn't say, the actions and relationships that we sort of addressed, the unfinished parts of our lives. Everybody, through the course of their life, has, in the wake of their journey, some rubble of relationships that are aching to be addressed. Forgiveness, reconciliation, restoration, wholeness. It's not found in being strong, it's found in being real. That, I believe, is the ultimate goal of our practice. And spiritual care, it's not about being good to get into heaven, it's about being authentic, because nothing inauthentic can dwell there. As you lie in bed, this is your view. You look at the ceiling. You watch the clock on the wall, wondering how much time you have left before you go into that bright tunnel of light. So what do? Most patients pray. Even those who declare themselves as agnostic hope and reach out to something that will give them strength and reassurance. Now, I'm so tall that I can get this shot over the shoulder of Jesus in the chapel. On the table, we have a blank notebook, and people write the most poignant and beautiful prayers there. Prayers like, "Dear God, be with my mom. She is suffering so much. She has struggled so hard. The doctors have given up hope, but I haven't. And yet, if she is to go, may she feel your love. May she watch over us. We ache for your miracle. Please be with us." That's a very sophisticated prayer, though it sounds very simple on the surface, because you can see that daughter is holding life and death in her heart and her words at the same time, which is what I encourage family members and patients to do. You don't need to focus just upon life and surviving and ignore death totally. You're more complex than that, and your heart is big enough to contain both sides of the story. And then to learn how to just sit with that, abide with it. And hope that you both survive the treatment and survive the catastrophe if it is to befall you. Because death, as medicine has proved and as people have known throughout the ages, is a 100% statistic. Eventually, it's going to happen. And the hope proclaimed by the wisdom and faith traditions throughout the ages is indeed real. I love the work of Dr. Gregory Shushan, who looked at different cultures that were separated by vast spans of time and geographical distance. And he was looking at the universal similarities in their mythologies and their shamanic journeys, and what he found testifies to the speculation of Dr. Alexander this morning that the faith traditions probably started because of near-death experiences and shamanic visions. They are universal in their similarities of leaving this world, moving to another, encountering other beings, receiving information. It's all about the love, and justice is an aspect of that, and then returning here with a message. And then as you filter it down to the different time periods and the different languages and the cultural traditions, they become more diverse. Of course they would. I, as a 21st century Christian, I'm not going to speak of near-death experiences in terms of ancient Hindu language. It's not part of my culture. I'm going to express it according to the cognitive storehouse of my own experience and my understanding of who I am and where I am. Then as you move down to the individuals, it becomes more and more diverse, of course, appropriate to each person's individual journey and the mythological framework and the homework of their hearts that need to be done. This is why when I die, or if I have another near-death experience, I will see my grandmother, not your grandmother. It becomes specific to the individual. But what I saw was great. Let me tell you the story. I was on internship. It was my second of 4 tumors. I was 27 years old. It was growing in me, as you have to let it do so that it gets big enough to show up on a CT scanner or an MRI or an MIBG. But even though less than a centimeter in size, it was metabolically very active. This was the one on my femoral artery. And as on other Sundays, I got up to do a service, and this one was in a hospital chapel, not at the church. And as on other Sundays, I said the prayers, and I greeted the people, and we sang a hymn, and then I got up to give a sermon. But then, unlike any other Sundays, I died. And it became the only Sunday that I've truly worshiped. The only Sunday where I have experienced praise in its purest form. I wasn't a minute into the sermon, which I had worked very hard on. I thought it was going to be good. When the familiar symptoms began to manifest, I began to get hot and flush, that trembling, that rapid heart. And inside, my internal voice was saying, no, get a hold of it, David. Ground yourself. But before I could, I blacked out. I crashed to the floor. Now, from my height, it's a long way down. Fortunately, I was unconscious before I hit that hard vinyl or the linoleum. And suddenly, I was here. No out-of-body experience, no tunnel with the light at the end. Instead, immediately, I was on a grassy hill. I could feel every blade of grass, colors more vivid than I've ever experienced here. The light was shining through me from everywhere, not just from a star or a sun above. And at the top of the hill was that tree. With every fiber of my being, I ached to run to that tree because I knew if I reached it, I would see what's on the other edge of that horizon, and I would never come back here. I knew that I was there, not here. I knew that there was a difference between that realm and dimension of consciousness, and I knew that this was what my heart and soul had longed and ached for all of my life, and that we are destined for, and from which we emanate. I was still me. Humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, just like this. I don't know how tall I was. And I was home. There's no other word I've ever heard so accurately describes the feeling of being home. Why? Because there you are congruent. Here we spend a great deal of energy avoiding ourselves. We are fractured in any moment. Part of you is thinking about words I just said. Part of you is wondering what's to come. Part of you wishes you had more lunch or coffee, and part of you wants to go to the bathroom, but stay here. Because all of you is aching to be congruent and no longer straining against any aspect of the now. The eternal now from which all of this emanates. I was not alone. There was an entity by my side. Now, if I had been a little brighter, I would have turned and looked at him so I could describe him to you and so I could recognize what he looked like. But it was a distinctly masculine figure, a character. How do I describe this being? Well, wonder, joy, power, authority, compassion, wisdom, brilliance, might, majesty. That's what he looked like. A lot of people have said to me, well, Jesus, that sounds like Jesus. Have you just described you know, the figure of your faith. And I'm like, it wasn't Jesus. They wouldn't send Jesus. It was a junior undersecretary of a guy who worked in the warehouse. They're not going to send the big guy to me. But no less infused with that signature of character. And it was like I popped into the middle of a conversation. He said, "It's great to see you, David." I said, "It's great to be here. I'm finally home. Come on, let's run to the top of the hill." He said, "You can't go up there. In fact, you can't stay here. You got to go back." You notice how casual this conversation is? It's a peculiar quality I find of the transcendent. They're all very relaxed and cool up there. I said, "Go home, go back. What do you mean?" "No, ridiculous. Come on, let's go." And he said, "No, look, things are going very well. You wouldn't think that looking at my body. The patients had all been removed from the chapel. The doctor was giving me CPR. There were 2 nurses and my wife terrified. My heart had stopped and I was gone. 15 minutes, I found in total. But I didn't care." And I said, "What do you mean? I mean, I'm here. I'm home. You can't send me back. I'm finally here." And he said, "Things are going very well, but you have a lot of work to do. So we'll be with you, but you can't stay here. Let no one tell you there cannot be sorrow in heaven, because I felt my heart sink like nowhere else. You can't send me back," I said. "Please, don't do that." And I felt a touch upon my shoulder, such as I had one. And an endearing laugh rose from his being, like you would chuckle about a 10-year-old kid who doesn't want to go to bed on Christmas Eve. And he just said, "We'll see you later." Boom. I was back. Here. Oh, the density of flesh, the pull of gravity, the sluggishness of thoughts, the poverty of words. This is an abysmal reflection of being. But it's the necessary landscape in which we move and learn and grow. So eventually I became a hospital chaplain after being in the parish for 10 years. And now for 20 years, I've been learning from people like this. Angie was a beautiful soul who worked as a waitress all of her life, but had been in over 90 movies and film as an extra, always in the background, never a leading role. But her being emanated love of such purity and beauty that we were all drawn to her. She was our favorite, even though we're not allowed to have them. Angie was thrilled. And as the camera had moved over us and then down into that shot of us praying together, she looked at me and she said, "Finally, I get to star in the show." She died surrounded by love and shining with a nobility that was astonishing. I find in my 20 years practice that people near the end of life commonly have nearing death experience. And a near-death experience is when they leave their body and go to another realm. But a nearing-death experience can include visitation from the spirit of a loved one. And that's the most common one. They can talk. Sometimes it seems incoherently about preparing for a trip. There's symbolic language. But they are infused, when they are conscious, they are infused with a very quiet and secret existential equilibrium. It's safe to talk with me about that. I'll ask that question, "Are you afraid to die?" And the response usually, as long as we have physical suffering under control, the response is, "Well, I'm not keen on dying. I worry about how that's going to feel. But death itself, no, I'm not afraid," which is always the invitation. And I'll ask, why is that? Well, Brenda was a great example. She was going for the Hail Mary Pass, a unrelated bone marrow transplant in which we replace her whole immune system with that of a donor, but not one she's related to. And we want 10 out of 10 HLA protein markers for the best type of match, but she only had 6. When you're Brenda, a mother of a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, you go for the Hail Mary Pass. but it rendered her, as you see, jaundice, kidney, liver failure, multi-system failure, and she lay there with amber streaks and tears running down, staining the pillow as we chatted. Are you afraid to die? And she wept as she talked about the love for her kids, but she said, I know I'm not going to make it, but no, I'm not afraid. And why? I asked. Well, she said, I had an interesting experience a couple of nights ago. The room was filled with this presence, this sparkling light, and I had an entire shift in my consciousness, my being. She said, I felt perfectly safe and it hasn't left me. Do you think that was God? I said, well, it wasn't the custodian. Have you ever had that feeling before? And her eyes became wide and she said, yes, yes. The birth of my first child, it was very difficult. But I think I left my body. I was watching the whole thing from above. And I felt that same peace. Do you think it's real? That's a very common question. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was medications. Oh, honey, we don't have drugs that good. Yes, I said. Yes, you can trust that that was real. I hear about it all the time. And it's universal. It happens to people all over the place, all ages, all cultures, and it leaves you feeling, well, I didn't tell her. It leaves me feeling an ache. I am homesick for what I saw and touched on. And you end up, if you survive it and you walk through this world, you end up sort of an odd duck in a realm that doesn't feel quite like home. So I said, I trust that you will go into that light and you will continue after this. Do you want to look over your kids? Yes, she said, I want to watch over them. Do you want them to be here when you die? No, I've said all I need to say, just my husband, maybe the nurse. I said, when do you think you're going to die? And she said, tonight. Now, I knew her stats. I knew her energy, and I was looking into her eyes, and I said, I think you're right. I think you'll die tonight. What's your pain right now? Because you can't take care of the soul until you take care of the body. What's your pain out of 10? She said, 15. She had been suffering excruciating pain, and yet I could not see it contort her face. There was a shift in her relationship to her own experience that went beyond human. I said, well, let's get that under control. It means you'll probably be asleep, unconscious when you die. Is that okay? Yes. Yeah. I'll have those frank conversations with people near the edge of death. Do you want to be awake or asleep when you die? Who do you want to have around you? What do you think it will be like? What time would you like to go? Is there someone who is supposed to be here for you? They ache to have that transparent conversation. They can't do it with their family and friends because they want to protect them. Now, we know the after effects of near-death experiences. Maybe you're familiar with these. All these aspects increase. Many have an increased psychic phenomenon, decreased interest in material reality, inclusive spirituality, right? But for the people who are on the edge of death, this is the fundamental one. If they've had a near-death experience or a visitation from the spirit world, they are not afraid of death anymore. They face it with just confidence and clarity. That sense of being out of their body is so powerful and affirming that they will continue. It's such a transcendent, ineffable ecstasy. It's more than our words can express. When you meet death, it doesn't look like the Grim Reaper, right? It looks like your grandma who passed on before. Death greets you in the most loving, compassionate way that you would recognize. Now, is it actually your grandma or your deceased sibling, or is it presented as that form in order to help you feel safe and calm? I don't know. We'll all find out when we get there. But the message is clear that death is one of the safest things you could ever go through. It's our responsibility as the medical team to make sure your exit here is as smooth and pain-free as possible, but your landing on the other side is pretty much guaranteed to be smooth and perfect. And when you encounter that being of light, very different than the spirit of your grandmother, they're very different than an angel or a celestial entity. This ultimate being of light isn't seen, but it's felt and perceived. And you realize perhaps this is from that from which you flow. This is the ultimate. And it is love. I do not speak of love as an emotion in this state. It's critical for us to realize that love is not a feeling. It is the highest state of consciousness that we are evolving into. An evolutionary path that I'm convinced continues after we leave this world. You do not sit on a cloud playing a harp with no intermission. Boring. Instead, progressive growth, evolving into higher and higher forms of love. Brandon was dying, a young man. He was another one of these shining examples of the best of humanity, and the insult of cancer violated everyone's sense of justice and decency and the idea of a loving God. So they abandoned that concept. It did not hold their experience, and instead they just moved forward with their own love, as insufficient as that felt for them. His parents, divorced long ago, were amicable, brought to his bedside by the crisis, and they called for me to come. He had always wanted to chat with me because of an interview I'd done, but we never got to meet before he lost consciousness. It was critical to give them a roadmap of dying, so they knew what to expect. Among those things are changing in breathing, right? The apnea, the congestion, knowing how to discern if they're in physical pain, and nearing death awareness. Has anything interesting happened, I said, lately? Interesting, said his dad. Well, you know, a bit odd. Well, said his mom, I was sitting with him last week. He's been unconscious for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden he started talking, saying, Jessica, it's you. His father, his eyes went like this. What? You didn't tell me this? Turns out Jessica was Brandon's sister, their first child who died before Brandon was born. He knew of Jessica, but they hadn't talked about her in many, many years. And now he was saying her name? And then his dad said, I wish you had told me that, because last night I was sitting with Brandon and he started saying, Oma, his great-grandmother. They were so close. I said, well, okay, we know who his welcoming party's going to be. This nearing death awareness brought such comfort and changed the trajectory of grief for his parents and his loved ones and families. He had a big fan club crowding the hallway, and his parents gave me permission to go out and share this insight with them. And I asked them, anybody en route? Because that's important to know. Oh, yeah, said his cousin. His brother is coming in from Calgary, but the plane doesn't get here till 10:30. You think he's going to last? It was 5 o'clock. And I said, I'm absolutely confident he will hang on for his brother. Why? Because, she said, his brother had promised him that he would be there for Brandon when he died. They had made a pact, and they were really close. And indeed, he hung on and had an hour and a half, 90 minutes, with his brother at the bedside, and died peacefully thanks to good medical care, good pain management, and in no small part, assistance from the other side. Nearing death awareness, part of the trajectory towards death, is critical for healthcare providers to be aware of, in addition to measuring heart rate, clearing up incontinence, and to explain to the family, right? Doesn't need to eat any food. You don't need to put love in their mouth. They're going to sleep more, but trust that they can sense you and talk with you from a soul level, if not from a verbal level. Once families have this roadmap, and the patient, if they're awake, I'll explain this roadmap without hesitation. This is how a person usually dies. Then they realize what's ahead, and their imagination of dying is not as painful to them, because usually it's worse in imagination than it is in real life. I say that knowing I've been present at some horrific deaths, but usually the body and the soul knows what it needs to do. We are wise in the ways of living and dying, but it would be nice if we were wiser and were aware of the roadmaps along the way, especially of grief. Now, you know the stages of grief. There's denial. I can't believe it's not butter, right? And then there's bargaining. And then there's anger. And then there's depression. Unbelievable, this is not butter. And finally, there's acceptance. Now, these stages don't follow linearly. Usually they meander around. But just as with the way the body dies, to understand the way the heart moves into death and beyond enables a person to not be afraid, to walk in intentionally, and to be more compassionate with themselves. Because the pathways of grief are different for the person dying, for the family, and they're very, very distinct from depression. So grief for the family is anticipatory, for the patient is preparatory. Those are parallel but distinctly different paths. When a person has a near-death experience, there is, mingled in the preparatory grief for the patient, there is a secret expectancy and curiosity and wonder to get back to what they touched on, to realize that they dipped their toe in that final frontier, that unknown country, and they are aching to visit it in full. But again, they rarely speak of this in these terms with the family members, because that would sound like they're giving up on the love. Honoring the near-death experience of the dying helps them achieve a congruency. Again, what I call an existential equilibrium that is essential to their well-being at the most critical stage of their life, its end. That angelic celestial assistance will carry us over to the other side. It did for me. This was an incident that's rather humorous when you look back on it. It was code blue, my third round with cancer. I'm lying in the hospital bed. 3 weeks before, I was attending a therapeutic touch retreat where we do energy healing, and the instructor had given me a treatment, found the tumor. I hadn't told her. And then during that treatment, she began to weep. And I said, "Why are you crying?" And she said in a whisper, "There's an angel of the Most High across the bed from me." I got really excited, and I'm looking. Do I see a feather? Do I see a glowing ball of light? No, I see the door to the bathroom. And then she stopped, became quiet, and I said, "What's the message? They don't show up without a message." And she said, "The message is it's going to be very difficult for you this time, but we'll give you strength." That was not comforting for me. But I didn't tell my wife, I didn't tell my family. I simply went into the surgery, which went smoothly, and lay in the intensive care unit at 4 o'clock in the morning when code blue woke me up. The alarm bell ringing. I work in the hospital. I know what code blue is. And I thought, who's the poor sod who's on the edge of life? And then they came crashing through my door and surrounded my bed. David, are you all right?" I looked up at them and I said, "I'm cool. How are you?" The nurse looked at me strange. They put up the monitor. They're looking at the monitors. My BP had collapsed. I didn't have enough arterial pressure. I should not have been conscious. They had to put in a Swan's line, stab it in through my throat, the femoral artery, thread it into my heart so they could measure vascular pressure. The doc threaded it. He said, "It's going to pinch." I said, "It's okay." And he stuck it in. I didn't feel it. And then he began to curse and swear, and he said, "It's gone in wrong. Damn it. Do it again. We have to do it again." I looked up at him and I said, "You look stressed." "Let me sing you a song." And I began to hum Spirit of Gentleness, one of my favorite hymns. He looked at me, he looked at the nurse, and he just did it again and put it in again and got it in properly. And they were doing something at my back. I learned they were giving me drugs they've never given to a conscious patient. And they gave me those drugs helped bring my blood pressure back up. And then eventually they cleared out the room, and the nurse sat collapsing in the chair beside me, looked at me and said, "All right, young man, what the hell was that?" And I said, "Sorry, you all look kind of stressed. I thought I was trying to help you out." She shook her head. I never for a moment realized that's what the angel was talking about. I had no recollection of that incident and the help that was promised to me until 2 weeks later. This is because I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And I realized, oh, that's what they're talking about. So I went back after my recovery and I thanked the nurses, and they all gathered around me and they said, "What got into you? What? And I said, I didn't say an angel was at my side infusing you guys with wisdom and guiding you and filling my soul and shifting my consciousness to a state of existential equilibrium. Once the chicken crosses the road, this is the question. Now what? Once you've crossed over to the other side, that's the question. Now what? What am I here for? This is why I'm so grateful for the Life Changes Inventory. This is on the IAN's website. This is a fantastic questionnaire, 50 questions that all explore, for those who survive a near-death experience, how has this changed your life? I really appreciate this because I get to use it with my patients. About 30% of the NDEs I hear, and I hear a case every month, if not every week. Now, have I been recording that? I'm sorry, not systematically, but I will do so. This tool has been instrumental in helping them realize I am different. It can take a decade or longer to integrate these changes, but my goodness, they're very similar. I also use, of course, my religious practice. I'm there to support people in their religious and faith traditions, even if they have none. I help them with that. But rituals of the church or whatever faith tradition are meant to assist you in the evolution of your consciousness, the resonance and attunement of your consciousness with that underlying consciousness from which this reality emerges, or what the church calls God. Now, they don't teach it to us this way. There on the right side, we have the chakras. On the left side, there's 7 sacraments from the Catholic tradition. Lutherans only have 2 of these. You know, I like to say, what's the difference between Catholic and Lutheran? Well, we have less sacraments, but just as fulfilling. Use a fork, not a spoon, right? It's simplified, but all spiritual traditions have these rituals that, and in the center, there's the Kabbalah, right? The Sefillot from the Jewish mystical tradition, and then there are the stages of conscious evolution and its connection to the body. All of it, different languages and methodologies of expressing the same fundamental process of evolving into love itself. That process is accelerated when you're near death. And it all fundamentally works with energy. I use energy, therapeutic touch, non-contact energy treatments with patients, especially in pain and anxiety, and then at end of life. And we have it integrated into our healthcare team and into the policies and practices of our hospital. That's pretty good. When I sit with doctors and nursing students, and they say, "What is all this stuff?" And I tell them, "Well, you studied it." "What?" I said, "Yeah, second-year biochemistry in medical school." "You use Albert Leninger's book?" "Yes, his textbook." "Right. Check out, I think it's chapter 14. It's in the 700s, page 740 or something. It talks about biophotons and how every metabolic process within the body is initiated by the release of a particle of light from within the cell, the microtubules, the DNA. The frequency and amplitude of that light causes a cascade effect which results in all functioning within the body. It all starts with light. It all starts with energy. It all starts with consciousness. Did you read that chapter? And their eyes gloss over, so I send them a PDF of the textbook and I highlight. It's there in the medical schools. It's just not the dominant paradigm, and it's delightful. It's all energy. Here's a tadpole. They simply change the energy, the modulation, the amplitude of electrical signals within the cell, and it causes an eye to grow where the gut is. Energy is information. We are fundamentally wired into this energetic system. And I bring this up because patients will ask me, well, how is this possible? How is it I will continue after death? I say, because all of it is energy. It can either be destroyed, right? It can only be changed. And your energy right now. Here's some slides of osteoblasts, so bone cancer, before and after a treatment, right? Control group and therapeutic touch group, osteoblasts, tenocytes, fibroblasts. And you see some are more dense on the right side than the left side. That's the result of an energy treatment. Great study by Gloria Gronowitz and others. So I can bring this up with the medical students, with the interns, with the doctors, and show that we're dealing with the nature of consciousness. And then there's some other great studies out there. Every Sunday, people get together in Christian churches and pray, but are they told that it actually affects galvanic skin response and causes a shift in consciousness of the person on the receiving end, despite the distance between you? There's some good studies that demonstrate that. Then there was the Global Consciousness Project. Are you familiar? Right, 66 random number generators scattered throughout the globe in cities, jungles, oceans, all over the place. And they figured if consciousness is an energy, then if a big world event happens, there should be a ripple in the field of chaos, bringing about an alignment or a synchronicity in these random number generators. And what do you know? It works. They had it running for many, many years. 9/11, massive ripple. A lot of these random number generators synchronizing. They're not tied into the internet. They're individually monitored by people, and they send in the results afterwards. So there's no networking of these. They're totally separate from each other. There's no such thing as a private thought. Are you nervous? Love and energy of consciousness is amplified. And they found in this study, tragic events obviously elicit that grief and compassion. No wondering. Suffering is one of the most powerful experiences to modulate us to love itself. We become broken and brilliant through suffering, perhaps because it overrides the illusions of the ego and that we've got this all under control, we got this down. Sometimes we have to be broken open in order for the light to shine through. Does that mean that bad things, suffering, and trials like cancer are preordained for us? I have heard some at this conference say there is a plan, and others talk about free will, and of course it's a mixture of both. I have no answer for that. Patients ask me that as a representative of the big guy. Well, you're a minister. Is there a purpose and a plan to all this? And they're asking that on two levels, especially when they're dying. Why did this happen to my body? And why is this happening to my life? And I tell them, I don't know. Let's not put a lot of time into why did this happen, and let's put energy into what am I going to do with this? Because this has the power to heal your life even if you die, and shape their family's future and their path into the wonder of what we are. The realization that flesh and blood is just a piece of clothing you put on for a little while, and then you take it off. You are energy, and you are part of this matrix of manifestation. Max Planck was mentioned earlier. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. This is a founding father of quantum physics. We must assume behind the force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. The matrix of all matter is mind and consciousness itself. Wonderful. Amazing. But it doesn't preach well. I found, whenever I've done a service and I've tried to present the non-religious language for life after death and the nature of consciousness and the continuation of everything we hope for, I get a blank stare. But it's getting better. Our culture is more fluent in these terms, but our clergy are not. So I was thrilled last year to present to all of the Lutheran and many of the Anglican clergy and bishops in Ontario. And there were a lot of them there. And I presented on near-death experiences, the nature of consciousness, and the energetic anatomy. I thought they would either crucify me or embrace me. I'm still here. It was enthusiastically received. The clergy were hungry for a language that was intelligent to our time and our sense of place in the cosmos. And I gave them a dozen pages of resources and videos and links and, Ian's brochures, and helped them dive deep. They swallowed the red pill with enthusiasm. But when you try to preach it, it gets kind of flat and dull. So you have to animate it with different metaphors. Now, I noticed, Dr. Mays, you were presenting, you talked about flatland. 1866, Dr. Edwin Abbott came up with a teacher, Edwin Abbott. And I love using that story with atheists and agnostics and people who have discarded religion because it insulted their dignity with its behavior, or it presented a childish Sunday school terminology that just wasn't sufficient to hold their experience. And in it, I say, well, imagine a realm two-dimensional, and there's a circle, and it gets a visit. Here's an interlocution from a higher being, and it asks that being to reveal itself, and it's a sphere, a three-dimensional object. Show yourself. So the sphere moves through the two-dimensional plane in which the circle lives, and what does the circle see? Just a circle getting bigger and bigger and smaller. Doesn't make any sense to it. It is not until the sphere takes the circle to the three-dimensional realm that it finally gets it and realizes that's more real than this. It's such a beautiful, simple, and appropriate, helpful metaphor for what the spiritual traditions have been trying to express and have complicated unnecessarily through dogma and doctrine and orthodoxy and rules and power and corruption and the poverty of words. So we're working on Reformation 2.0, a new language and a new model of spirit. And it's not foreign to us. Here is a conversation.
It's been very interesting.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, we're going to turn up the volume. And it's a conference on physics.
And I
He's talking with Dr. James Gates.
From experimental physicists, as you can imagine.
Let's listen.
But this is why experimental...
Which means you're a theorist.
Yes. Something like that.
Yeah, okay. It's code for I'm a theorist.
I'm a theorist, exactly. But my point is that it is always the case that it is our experimental colleagues that prevent us from forming a religion.
I love this.
Because it is always grounded in what they can measure, as Martello keeps coming back to. And so although people can express either enthusiasm or dismay about where we are at a given point in time, I think that we need to be a little bit more humble and to understand that the process that we engage in is a constant flight from fantasy about what we would want to happen, and we query nature for that, and that query goes through experiment. So although this has probably been very entertaining for my audience here, I think that at the end of the day, we have to keep grounded in
honor the scientific
method. It's got to be about things that affect your lives, and those things are measurable things.
Right. So where has this pursuit taken you?
Oh my God.
Where have you landed?
Why would you ask that?
I'm asking you that here and now. It's New York City. It's March 7th.
Well, partly it's taken to these very strange images that are behind your head right now. These are pictures of equations. I've been, for the last 15 years, trying to answer the kinds of questions that my colleagues have been raising. And what I've come to understand is that there are these incredible pictures that contain all the information of a set of equations that are related to string theory. And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes, just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the matrix or not.
Wait, you're blowing my mind at this moment. So are you saying your attempt to understand the fundamental operations of nature leads you to a set of equations that are indistinguishable from the equations that drive search engines and browsers on
Yeah.
our computers.
That is correct. So,
Wait, I have to just be silent for a minute here. So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos.
into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
Computer code.
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
It's not just sort of resembles computer code. You're saying it is computer code.
It's not even just is computer code, it's a special kind of computer code that was invented by a scientist named Claude Shannon in the 1940s. That's what we find very, very deeply inside the equations that occur in string theory and in general in systems that we can say are supersymmetric.
Okay.
Time to go home, I think. Where are we going to go? So are you saying we are all just, there's some entity that programmed the universe and we're just expressions of their code?
Well, I didn't say that. Some of those
Like the Matrix? That's
Some of
what
the-
you said.
Some of those codes are showing on the screen behind you right now. They don't look like codes, but these pictures, which we call adinkras, are graphical representations of sets of equations that are based on codes. So this is, in fact, to answer your question more directly, I have in my life come to a very strange place because I never expected that the movie The Matrix might be an accurate representation of the place in which I live.
So, you are a child of God. You are part of the realm of heaven. You are an expression, an individualized, particular expression, localized from the universal consciousness from which all of reality emerges. You live in a simulation, a required one, for the experience of being. Stephen Hawking, fervent atheist almost to his death, said in his final paper that he agrees we live in a simulation emanating from a different reality, which means I can't believe reality is subjective. And means that we are hungry for a new language of mythology and faith that is congruent with the experience of the ages and our sense of place in the universe. And when we are dying, we are most open to that model. Yet we don't need to understand it. Just focus on the love and you'll be doing the wisest thing possible.